Dario Alves, Moncorvo, 1940. He was born between 1959 and 1987. He worked as a graphic designer in advertising and graphic arts companies. In 1961 he enters the Porto Faculty of Fine Arts, where he completes the general course in painting, 1965, and later the complementary course in painting, 1972. Graphic design bears a profound influence in his pictorial work, both in the choice of images and themes and in his composition and graphics. In 1976 he joined the teaching staff of the Porto Faculty of Fine Arts, where he was president of the board for 13 years, 1984 to 93, 1996 to 2000. His first solo exhibition was held at the Jornal de Notícias Gallery, Porto, 1979, but in 1976 he already had a vast curriculum in participating in collective exhibitions, among which the exhibitions with all the members of Grupo Puzzle, even before completing his academic training, in February 1976. On the 25th of October 1974, he collaborated with Clara Meneas, Alfredo Queiroz Ribeiro, and Lima de Carvalho in the intervention that the Grupo ECA, 1974-77, planned for the Tour dos Clérigos. Since August that the Grupo ECA had been working in urban space and bringing artists together with their proposals. They intended to wrap the Tour dos Clérigos with a plastic ribbon, but for technical reasons the project was reduced to the deployment of a yellow ribbon, which would remain, for a brief period, hanging from the bellroom down to the street level. In that same year Dario Alves painted O Porto e Alguns das suas Torres dos Clérigos, Porto and some of its towers of clérigos, and years later O Porto num postal ilustrado, Porto on an illustrated postcard, 1978. Tour dos Clérigos, 1976, was one of the first 3 paintings done by Grupo Puzzle, and it was made from a tourist postcard and displayed together with the postcard. This desecration of painting as a surface identical to that of the postcard, and to which it returns, is a recurring theme in Dario Alves' work. On the surface of the canvas, Dario overlays the virtuosity of shadow and perspective exercises from academic painting with the stylization and sensuality of advertising images. At a time when all images were mediated, he unveils the space of painting as a world affected by that same fantasy. This deconstruction between realism and illusion results from a game of mastery. This postmodernist attitude leads Joaquim Matos Chaves to define his work as quietly revolutionary. The idea of painting as a craft and the use of graphic arts as political propaganda were hot topics during the summer of 1975. In January 1976, a month before the Grupo Puzzle's dinner intervention at Galeria Alvarez Doya, a bomb was detonated at Avor School, precisely when the group was showcasing contemporary Soviet posters. Between 1975 and 1977, Dario Alves was part of the technical council and board of directors of the Avor Cooperative, Porto, a center of intense cultural activity and anti-fascist militancy. The organization of artists around cultural policies and activities became, at this time, a priority. The sense of humor in the technical and pictorial composition of Grupo Puzzle's proposal interested Dario Alves until the moment when performance began to be accepted as part of his means of expression. Although he designed the poster for the Third International Art Meeting in Póvoa do Varzim, 1976, Dario Alves no longer participates in the interventions that Grupo Puzzle submits for this event. He also paints the work sent to the exhibition Artistas Portuguesas, Portuguese Female Artists, 1977, a painting based on a magazine picture. In 1978, the Tour dos Clérigos appears once again as the poster image for the exhibition Four Pintores do Porto, 4 painters from Porto, with which Dario Alves, Carlos Carraro, Albuquerque Mendes and Pedro Roca presented themselves at the Fine Arts School in Lisbon. Dario Alves was financed by the Kalaust Gulbenkian Foundation to visit the graphic design biennials in Poland, Czechoslovakia and Italy. Armando Azevedo, Vila Nova de Famalicão, 1946, Coimbra, 2021, law student at the University of Coimbra since 1966, Armando Azevedo dropped out of his bachelor's degree in 1970 to start attending Coimbra's Circle of Visual Arts. The circle worked as an artistic society of sorts, which is not only an atelier, but a true creative laboratory, where permeability between the space of experimentation and socializing is celebrated. First as an associate, then as a teacher, 1976, Armando Azevedo is the only member of Grupo Puzzle that remained there after the revolution of 1974. With the departure of João Dixo, Albuquerque Mendes and Fernando Pinto Coelho to Porto, they form an independent working group, in order to carry on with the experiences developed in the recreational context of the Circle of Visual Arts, and that after 1974 would pour out from the school. Between 1973 and December 1975, Armando Azevedo divided his artistic activity with military duty. Leaving the army in December of 1975 sped up the creation and definition of collective work. Individually and collectively, he was interested in the experimental environment of space and time, transforming them into events and environments. What stands out in his work is the blurring of boundaries between form and content, between printed objects and the environment, between everyday objects and those of artistic nature. At the Circle of Visual Arts, his first solo exhibition presents Embalagens Brancas numa embalagem negra, white containers in a black container, 1972. The monoramies are followed by the entropic collages of cadeiras e bancos, chairs and benches, 1976. Pornography, politics, religion, cinema are themes that, when dealt with in freedom, define themselves in a state of disorder. The increase and overlapping of images that daily occupy the media and the urban spaces contaminate his artistic objects. Armando Azevedo's silhouette appears on the walls of Coimbra, in a figure-depth game where he takes hold of advertising information while passively identifying with it. This poster leads us to record Echoes, Recollections, 1977, an exhibition where he collects memories lived in the present. These collections and appropriations will have an important echo in the Grupo Puzzle's performance. Collectively, he organizes Nossa Coimbra deles, Our Coimbra theirs, 1972, Prenda para Josefa de Obidos, Gift to Josefa de Obidos, 1972, 1000-011. Aniversario da Arte, 1 millionth anniversary of art, 1974, Semana de Arte da, na, Rua, Art Week on, of, the Street, 1976, among many other projects. His teachers at the Circle of Visual Arts were João Dixo, Angelo de Souza and Alberto Carnaro. Ernesto de Souza also organized events at the Circle and invited its members to the exhibition Alternativa Zero, Zero Alternative, 1977. In 1977 and following the work Todo OE as Parts, The Whole and the Parts, 1977, prepared for Alternativa Zero, Armando Azevedo founded with other elements of the circle the Grupo de Intervenção do Círculo de Artes Plásticas de Coimbra o Grupo Cores, intervention group of Coimbra's Circle for Visual Arts or Color Group, to which belonged Cao Pestana, Rui Orfao, Tulia Saldana, Antonio Barros and Teresa Loff. Armando Azevedo was part of the Grupo Puzzle since its foundation in 1976 until its last exhibition in 1981. Not having academic artistic training, the collective work he produced with Grupo Puzzle was the foundation of his individual work, which he never stopped developing. When working in Puzzle, he begins by using collages so that his participation becomes unique. But it is also for some of the group's paintings that he paints for the very first time. He understands individual and collective work as complementary. He takes part individually in every exhibition and event where the Grupo Puzzle intervenes. He's the member of the group that most believed in the value of the collective work, as the group upheld, and, for that very reason, his voice stands out in the few written records that Grupo Puzzle signed. Gerardo Burmester, Porto, 1953. He enrolled in the Porto Faculty of Fine Arts in 1973, but moved to Paris in 1975 where he remained until 1978. In 1978 to 1979 he moves to Rio de Janeiro. He debuts as Grupo Puzzle's operator in the 4 Encontros Internacionais de Arte, 5th International Art Meetings, in Portugal, Caldas da Rainha, 1977. When he stayed in Paris, João Dixo, Graca Marais and Jamie Silva were also there. Gerardo Burmester shows interest in the Puzzle's paintings precisely because of the performance that they implied, conceived by Grupo Puzzle for the Encontros Internacionais de Arte, International Art Meetings, in Portugal, contrary to the group of painters that at this time stopped collaborating, that is Dario Alves, Carlos Carrero and Pedro Roca. He does not participate in the rituals that accompanied the creation and destruction of the work left in Caldas da Rainha, as he is out of the country but assumes his position in the group through his collaboration in the painting. In 1977 the formal division of Grupo Puzzle paintings, which was done in puzzle pieces, is transformed into a succession of horizontal bands to accommodate the now 7 individual collaborators. The previous year, at the 3 Encontros Internacionais de Arte, 3rd International Art Meetings, in Póvoa do Varzim, 1976, Grupo Puzzle had already participated in the first performance that Burmester presented in public space. Half dressed in unblemished white clothes and half in stained and worn-out clothes. One can read, "Art is to build is to destroy is to build is to destroy," on the traces of green and orange pigments with which he writes on the pavement. This same cycle appears in Puzzle's work when the painting, already performative in itself which implied the collage of a series of pieces of the canvas on the exhibition wall, is destroyed in a performative ritual. However, the cyclical paradox of the creative process is also manifested in a path that could be called premonitory of the relationship between the individual work of Gerardo Burmester and his collaboration with Grupo Puzzle. Grupo Puzzle supports Gerardo Burmester's construction of destruction and the latter collaborates by announcing the performance as Tres Mortes de São João Baptista, the 3 Deaths of St. John Baptist, that Albuquerque Mendes presents at the same meetings. His first solo exhibition was part of the cycle of 5 individual exhibitions plus 1 group exhibition, organized at the Engenheiro Antonio de Almeida Foundation, Porto, 1979. The introduction of landscape in Puzzle's painting coincides with his most active participation in the group, but Gerardo Burmester was a driving force in the relationship between painting and performance. In December 1979 he collaborates for the last time in the only piece of work in which the members of Puzzle painted a landscape and the inverted portraits of the 5 group members on the same canvas, leaving the decision of how it hangs on the wall to the public. Art e a Criança na Galeria, Art and the Child at the Gallery, from J.N. Porto. His joining the group coincides with a series of performances that Puzzle organizes to introduce themselves internationally. In 1978 at the 29th Salon de la Jeune Peinture in Paris. In 1979 at the Exhibition of Modern European Contemporary Art in Toulouse-Mirail and at the first Symposium International d'Art Performance in Lyon. Such orientation also meant Grupo Puzzle lost more members for the second time, those whose training had been through the circle. Gerardo Burmester also stopped collaborating with the group in 1980 but continued to send invitations for his artists to exhibit, as in the exhibition Psegem de Gerardo Burmester na Actual Psegem Portuguesa, Gerardo Burmester's landscape in the current Portuguese landscape, Eng. Antonio de Almeida Foundation, 1981. In 1982 he founds the art association Esparco Lusitano Gallery in Porto, with Albuquerque Mendes, which he inaugurates with a performative festival. Later on, his installations and environments that were created for specific spaces, such as Portugal e um país bem porreirinho. Portugal is a really cool country. Esparco Lusitano, 1983, would be called frame installations. This relationship between painting and performance, between the singular and the whole, defined Grupo Puzzle's strategy. Carlos Carrero, S. Miguel, 1946. He enrolled in the Lisbon Faculty of Law but transferred to the Porto School of Fine Arts, where he finished the complementary course in painting in 1972. His first solo exhibition was in Ponta Delgada, 1968, and he had his first solo exhibition in Porto, at the Zen Gallery, 1973. In 1975 he collaborates in painting the panels for Avenida da Boa Vista, in front of Alvarez Doyar Gallery, with the participation of João Dixo and Albuquerque Mendes, among many other artists and anonymous people. Having received a grant from the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, he conducted research into kitsch and bad taste in Portugal, 1978. The realistic figuration of Carlos Carrero's work refers directly to the daily problems of artists in Portugal and to their cultural requests and aspirations. In Levantamento da Arte do Século XX, reviewing 20th century art, in Porto, 1975, he criticizes the state of art in Portugal, satirizing the relations between art indoors and the global cultural system. He reproduces works by Joaquim Rodrigo and Costa Pinheiro within O Culcionador, the collector, depicted in the slimy figure of a chameleon. It also refers to the tragedy of the colonialist museum policy, representing the historical characters of São Vicente de Fora panel of São Vicente de Fora, that are watching the cultural wealth being washed overboard. The paintings evoke the absurdity of the country's political strategies, alluding to the inexistence of a contemporary art center in the north of the country. The painting, Invest in os Quatro Vintes, Invest in, reproduces works by Angelo de Souza, Armando Alves, José Rodrigues, and Jorge Pinheiro. Without dissociating cultural from economic values, Carrero represents these authors in the portrait of a family that invests in itself as safe values. Assuming the formation of the Quatro Vintes, 1968-71, as a market strategy, Carrero paints its members dressed in dinner jackets. It is also in a dinner jacket that he performs at the Alvarez Doyar Gallery, where the first exhibition of the Quatro Vintes was held, for Grupo Puzzle's training dinner. Carlos Carrero's participation with Grupo Puzzle evokes the urgency of cultural mobilization, while highlighting the bourgeois commitments he integrates in his own art. Having lost the expected prestige that the group promised to explore, even if through contestation, Carrero leaves the group. With him he takes the traces of his individual collaboration that would destroy the collective Grupo Puzzle's work, but this absence served to activate the memory that art does not belong to a single person. In 2011 he rebuilds a substantial portion of these works. João Dixo, Vila Real, 1941, Porto, 2012. He enrolled at the Porto School of Fine Arts in 1961, where he completed the general, 1965, and the complementary course in painting, 1968. He taught at the Circle between 1966 and 1974, where he encourages art as a cultural action and provocation. In January 1974 he moved to Porto and started teaching at the Porto School of Fine Arts. Her first solo exhibition dates back to 1963. His connection to the Alvarez Gallery was consolidated in 1969, when he held a solo exhibition there. At the Alvarez Doyar Gallery he also presents Achados Arqueológicos da Era da Relatividade de uma Região do Mundo, archaeological findings from the relativity era in a region of the world, 1972, O Retrato, Portrait, 1972, Pinturas Anuladas, Cancelled Paintings, 1973, E Participa no Ciclo International Perspectiva 74, International Cycle Perspective 74, 1974-75. In 1974 he takes part on the 20th anniversary exhibition of the Dominguez Alvarez Gallery, where he also presents Soberas Historias do meu país, about the stories of my country, 1974, and takes part in the cycle Painting and Politics, with New Stories of My Country, 1974. He produces Carca ao Tesouro, Treasure Hunt, 1974, during the Encontros Internacionais de Arte em Portugal, International Art Meetings in Portugal, Casa da Caruagem, Valadares. The purpose of the meeting was to bring together critics, journalists, poets, collectors, national and international artists in a series of talks, speeches, and exhibitions. This experience would define the path of Grupo Puzzle. João Dixo participates individually in all international art meetings in Portugal held by Grupo Alvarez. The art critic Egidio Alvaro already signed the texts of their exhibition catalogues in the early 1970s. The magazine Revista de Artes Plásticas, magazine of plastic arts, Grupo Alvarez dedicates the first national document or retrospective to him, highlighting the 10 years of active resistance to social and cultural pressures and censorship coming from the art environment. His work is characterized by constant self-criticism. At Expo Acre 74, Egidio Alvaro and Ernesto de Souza simultaneously presented it. Still in 1974 he signs the Open Declaration of a Group of Democratic Artists. In 1975 he applied to the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation to study in Paris under the guidance of Bernard Rancelacq and Serge III Oldenburg, Fluxus artist. It was the latter's exhibition that was on display at Alvarez Doyar Gallery when the revolution of 25th of April 1974 broke out. Dixo leaves for Paris in 1976, soon after the creation of Grupo Puzzle at the Alvarez Doyar Gallery. As a study case, he presents the theme Collective Convention ex Individual Conscience, where we can foresee the concept that will originate the organization of Grupo Puzzle. This proposal comes in response to the public reception of his work in the Art and Politics cycle, where Dixo explored the isms of the revolutionary political discourse in his painting. In an exercise of self-critical reflection, Dixo modifies the work in the light of the political cultural transformations of 1974, but when he unmasks the homogenizing dangers of democratic demagogy, the isms, he is considered apolitical. João Dixo is a member who links all the artists who came to be part of Grupo Puzzle in 1976. His work stands out for its interpretation of the problems of the avant-garde in an unconventional way and for a caustic critical conscience, while always remaining a figurative painter. Albuquerque Mendes, Troncoso, 1953, he attended the Coimbra Visual Arts Circle from 1970, where he held 2 solo exhibitions, 1971/1975. There he participated in a series of events ranging from the inaugural exhibition of the Circle Black Gallery, 1970, to the 1.000.011 Aniversario da Arte, 1 millionth art anniversary, 1974, organized in collaboration with Ernesto de Souza and following a proposal by Robert Filiu. This anniversary, an excuse to celebrate the contamination between art and life, is presented in synchrony with the creative and festive spirit celebrated at the Circle. In 1972, Albuquerque Mendes settled in Porto, where he continued his studies in mechanical engineering at the Institute of Engineering, a degree he interrupted to do his compulsory military service. In the hot summer of 1975, Albuquerque Mendes is part of the movement of the Armed Forces Assembly. He collaborates in the painting of the panels for Avenida da Boa Vista, in front of Alvarez Doyar Gallery, and presents his first ritual at the 2 Encontros Internacionais de Arte, Second International Art Meetings, in Viana do Castelo, August 1975. By bringing the local population together in collective events, Albuquerque Mendes confronted them with a pagan ritual that simulated religious rituals, in which they took part voluntarily. Albuquerque questions the artistic phenomenon, involving the population and exposing it to self-criticism. At the 3 Encontros Internacionais de Arte Portugal, Third International Art Meetings in Portugal, Povoa de Varzim, 1976, he presented the ritual as Tres Mortes de São João Baptista, the 3 Deaths of St. John Baptist, with the collaboration of Gerardo Burmester. Albuquerque distinguishes himself as one of the artists who earlier and most persistently created performance in Portugal. His rituals multiplied in the country and crossed borders, thus being invited to individually perform for international events where he travels with Puzzle Group. The art critic Egidio Alvaro, Coimbra, 1937, Montrouge, 2020, wrote extensively about his performances and facilitated their international integration. In January 1976, even before the creation of Grupo Puzzle, he presented a solo exhibition in Alvarez Doyar Gallery, Porto, but, even in 1973, he had participated in the installation of Floresta, the Forest, in the same gallery, an original project by Fernando Pinto Coelho, where later other elements of the circle took part. In 1977 he takes part in the Vanguard Alternativa Zero Alternative Vanguard, following an invitation by Ernesto de Souza. He is one of 3 members of Grupo Puzzle that were always part of the group since its foundation and remained so until the last exhibition in 1981. That year, he and Gerardo Burmester created the performance Portugal e Lindo, Portugal is Beautiful, Chiado Building, Coimbra, and the following year they founded the art association Luso Space, Porto 1982 to 1985. In the exhibitions Exercicio com Selo de Origem, Exercise with Origin Seal, Circle, 1975, and in his intervention at the Alvarez Gallery, 1976, Albuquerque danced in a dinner jacket to the sound of an orchestra and questioned the language used by art critics, artist spotlight and physical confrontation with the public. His work crosses performance, painting, happenings, and installations and explores practically and conceptually the socio-cultural surroundings where the author moves. The ritualistic relationship of communion and its association with symbolic elements are factors that Albuquerque Mendes explores in his rituals, associating performance and painting in a territory of collective actions. Graça Marais, Bragança, 1948. She was born in Trás-os-Montes. After living in Mozambique for some years, she returns to Vrô, her home village. In 1966 she moved to Porto and joins the Porto School of Fine Arts. She completes the complementary course in painting in 1971. Her first solo exhibition dates from 1974 at the Alberto Sampaio Museum in Guimarães, where she was living at the time of the 1974 April Revolution. She participates in several collective exhibitions, sharing work with other elements of puzzle that studied at the Fine Arts School, even before the creation of the group. In 1975, she joins Egidio Alvaro and Jamie Isidoró's initiative of bringing art to the street. At the 2 Encontros Internacionais de Arte, Second International Art Meetings, in Portugal, in Viana do Castelo, she places her easel in Praça da República and paints the crowd that surrounds it. Who is this audience? At a time of profound crisis for galleries and the art market, Graça Marais finds in this a dialogue between the work of international artists and local populations. At the same time, the ongoing revolutionary process was being observed internationally, and the populations were confronting their own cultural traditions and demanding their needs to be satisfied. The strength of collective labor depended on people being united, but the revolution instigated radical ruptures and transformation of life conditions and ways of life. In the fine arts, Neorealism and the avant-garde also intersected, while speeches against political and military colonialism warned of the dangers of cultural globalization. The 1974 revolution unveiled a world in which women could finally intervene in the public space and claim their rights. Graça Moraes' work straddles these borders. In Diário de uma Revolução, Diary of a Revolution, 1975, Graça Moraes evokes the unity between the female population who make themselves heard, namely through the right to vote, and a series of political figures who arrive from exile to govern the country in democracy. Political instability and cultural vagueness are hot and interdependent themes that artists are forced to manage in their work. In contrast to the avant-garde, which establishes a radical renewal of creative processes and their aesthetic assumptions, Graça Moraes' work manages an individual process of becoming closer to the core of popular and family narratives. And her interest in returning to memory and the past in Trás Montes is done through the persistence of painting. It was her moving to Paris with a grant from the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, 1976 to 1978, soon after the creation of Grupo Puzzle, that allowed her to devote herself exclusively to painting. Under the guidance of the painter Joan Robascal, an advocate of critical figuration, she came in contact with urban social criticism of the society of entertainment. On her return to Portugal, Graça Moraes assumed a social and psychological determinism of never ceasing to draw closer to the female experiences in the village where she was born. In her paintings, the textures and the design of the braids of Vrouw women are registered, two universes that are accomplices in the history of the village. Paradoxically, it is the constant transit between her origins and the contexts in which she lives that gave Graça Moraes the critical distance necessary to be able to transport the living organics of certain communities to her work, an instrument through which she puts forward her social and individual liberation. Sadness, old age and the harshness of the rituals of survival are neither a cult nor an object of contestation, but reflect the unavoidable management of encounters. While the institutional cultural bodies are slow to develop cultural policies for the country, Graça Moraes chooses the path of search and the daily encounter between herself and the people in whom she recognizes herself. Graça Moraes was the only female element of Grupo Puzzle since the beginning of the group, which she leaves in October 1977, after the intervention of the puzzle in the Fórum Encontros Internacionais de Arte nas Caldas da Rainha, Fourth International Art Meetings in Caldas da Rainha. Fernando Pinto Coelho, Coimbra, 1951. He graduated in architecture from the Porto School of Fine Arts in 1976, but his artistic training is based on the performative actions and environments created in the Visual Arts Circle of Coimbra. There he was a pupil of João Dixo and Angelo de Souza. Even after moving to Porto, he maintained a connectium with the circle, which he had attended since 1963. From his prolonged stay at the Visual Arts Circle of Coimbra we highlight Inversão do Espaço do Cap com Manga Plástica Ingeflável, Space Invasion of Cap with Waterproof Plastic Sleeve, 1970, Chuva de Papel, Paper Rain, 1970, The Covering of the Circle Gallery with Strips of Cloth, Attached Photograph, 1971, and The Forest, 1972. Amongst the collective collaborations, the following stand out: the inaugural exhibition of the Circle of Visual Arts Gallery, 1970, Nine Temas a Imaginação, Themes to Imagination, 1972, and Prenda para Josefa de Óbidos, Present to Josefa de Óbidos, an event that marked the second anniversary of Galeria Ogiva, Óbidos, 1972. First presented as an individual installation, a Floresta was later adapted to become a collective installation at the Alvarez Gallery, 1973, and reinstated in the exhibition Alternativa Zero, Zero Alternative, 1977, at the invitation of Ernesto de Souza. Her first solo exhibition dates back to 1974, at Judite Darcruz Gallery, Lisbon. Roca de Souza writes about this exhibition in Revista de Artes Plásticas, magazine of plastic arts. Each figure is organized by means of contradictory parts but connected to produce a recognizable anthropomorphic image. Seemingly collected from scraps of color photographs, these parts fit together like pieces of a puzzle, but generate a disturbingly ambiguous reality. This description corresponds precisely to the proposals that 2 years later Fernando Pinto Coelho presented to Grupo Puzzle, to paint the group's self-portraits and face, this time in the format of a puzzle. In December 1975 he presents himself at the exhibition The Railway as part of the Mito Group. This same group collaborated with Albuquerque Mendez in his exhibition at the Alvarez Doya Gallery in January 1976. The permanent organization of cultural actions in the circle, together with Joao Dixo, Armando Azevedo and Albuquerque Mendez, led him to express interest in joining Grupo Puzzle. At the end of the dinner that marked the creation of Puzzle at Galeria Alvarez Doya, Fernando Pinto Coelho breaks down the barrier between the audience and the group, moving from one space to the other. This intervention occurs through the showcase of individual qualities that the author projects as beneficial to the group. He carries samples of works that he copies from the other puzzle elements, plays the flute, wears a ballet costume and holds a small auction of pieces. He presents himself as a dynamic agent and a researcher of all artistic forms. This play between individual unpredictability and collective representation activates the group's purpose. The end of the meal corresponds to the beginning of the group's work, thus it can be said that Fernando Pinto Coelho was an integral part of the foundation of Grupo Puzzle. He participated in every work and intervention of Grupo Puzzle, having disengaged from some events in 1980. Pedro Roca, Porto, 1945. He enrolled in the Porto School of Fine Arts in 1967, where he completed the general course, 1971, and the complementary course in painting, 1972. He has been an assistant at the Fine Arts School since 1976 and was president of the board of directors between 1992 to 94 and 1995 to 96. His first solo exhibition was held at the Abel Salazar Gallery, Porto, 1973. On the 10th of June 1974 he collaborates in the funeral of the Sores dos Reis Museum, a procession action promoted by plastic artists and intellectuals that denounces the cultural stagnation of the museum since the nomination of its director in 1966. On the 25th of October 1974, he collaborated with Clara Menes, Alfredo Quiroz Ribeiro and Lima de Carvalho in the intervention that the Grupo ACA, 1974-77, was planning for the Tour dos Clérigos. All of the artists from fine arts seek to play an active role in the transformation of the country's cultural policy, through direct and provocative actions. The creation of a contemporary group with the intent of intervening in the urban space certainly served as a reference to stir up interest in creating another group, whose support would be painting. Pedro Roca also took part in the mural painting done in the Caixa Geral de Depositos building in Viseu, organized by the movement of the armed forces, in the hot summer of 1975. It is noteworthy to refer to the participation in the Survey of 20th Century Art in Porto, 1975, an exhibition that criticized the fact that there was no contemporary art center in the north of the country. This exhibition worked as a manifesto for the creation of a space with multiple functions, but whose program would respond to the unity of cultural aspirations. By protesting against the National Museum policy that cultivated the art of the past, the artists took part in this uprising for the democratization of art and the presence of living artists in the museum. At a time when the arts existed in confrontation, the variety of manifestations was also the basis of democracy. Intertextuality as a reference to the pictorial culture that characterizes Pedro Roca's work is found in this multiplicity and simultaneity of texts. This definition of a contemporary being that reads multiple references was the unanimous reason for the creation of Grupo Puzzle. The unanimous search for individuality and its multiple condition was evident in the performance painting of Grupo Puzzle, as well the explicit attention to the present, which implied the need and the collective effort to transform it. Pedro Roca was present at the group's creation dinner, where an analogy was created between the debate at the table and the rectangular support of the painting. However, he does not take part in performances again, when the group's artistic events begin to be the support for their interventions. For this reason, he no longer participates in the interventions presented at the Third International Art Meetings in Portugal, 1976, and ceases to belong to Grupo Puzzle before the Fourth International Art Meetings in Portugal, 1977, when the group's painting is, for the first time, literally destroyed in favor of performance. In a daily public ceremony, the group cuts out the puzzle painting displayed at the meetings to transform it into a time capsule, which they bury outside the Maloa Museum. Jamie Silva, Rigua, 1947. He enrolled in the Porto School of Fine Arts in 1965 and completed the complementary course in painting in 1972. In between, he completed 3 years of compulsory military service. He exhibits with Guacamare at the Alberto Sampaio Museum, Guimarães, 1976, at the Alvarez Doyar Gallery, Porto, 1976, and at the Centre Cultural Portugais of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation in Paris, 1978, where he lives with a scholarship from the Fine Arts Department of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation. In 1975 he took part in the Second International Art Meetings in Portugal, Viana do Castelo, organized by the gallery owner Jamie Isidoro, Porto, 1924–2009, and the art critic Egidio Alvaro. Following the challenge of the meetings to develop street art, Jamie Silva portrays the public that is attracted to the Praça da República. After covering the floor of the public square with the newspaper Diário de Notícias, he illustrates the pages of the daily newspaper with the faces of the inhabitants of Vienna. He transports the portraits of those who look for news in the daily newspaper to their respective pages, not before dephasing them in time and space. Jamie Silva warns against the contemporary being's loss of synchronism and re-establishes a collective, representing the spectators in his work. He recalls that, just as the perception of reality is made through cultural structures, so are the objects and structures represented in the pictorial field that exist beyond it. It was the search for that world without cultural and geographical borders and the need to activate an experience marked by the isolation of the country that he sought to find in Grupo Puzzle. It is the participation of a series of international artists in the art meetings and the bridge that Egidio Alvaro represents with Paris that led Jamie Silva to the creation of the Grupo Puzzle and to a stay in Paris between 1977–78. In Paris he meets João Dixo and Gerardo Burmester, among a larger community of Portuguese artists. On the other hand, the presence of puzzle members in Paris sped up the participation of the group in many events in France during these years. Jamie Silva participated in all of the group's exhibitions and interventions until October 1977, when the group painted O Resto e Psigem. The remainder is landscape, 2 pieces created for the exhibition Cultural Identity and Massification, organized by Egidio Alvaro in Lisbon.